Remember blowing bubbles with that solution in those little bottles and the plastic wand? Well, the craft of writing is a bit like blowing bubbles. Life is like a box of chocolates. And this holds true not only for your dramatic approach, but also for the characters in your story as well. Now, the study of real bubbles is actually a science which combines physics, geometry, and even calculus. And as with most natural phenomena, the dynamics that drive them have a parallel in psychology as well. For example, the math that describes the black hole in space can equally be applied to describing a prejudice in the mind. So, by observing bubbles, we can more easily grasp some otherwise intangible concepts about the psychology of stories and of the characters in them. Now, turning our attention to stories, let's look at several dramatic endeavors that can benefit by applying the qualities of bubbles. 1. Bubbles burst. Sometimes you want them to, and other times you don't. Also, the larger a bubble gets, the more impressive it is, but the more fragile as well. And until a bubble bursts, the tension along its surface tension, increases. But once it has burst, all the tension is gone. So the key is to blow the bubble as large as you can without exceeding the maximum sustainable tension. To do this, you need to know when to stop blowing, seal it off, and let it float on its own. In addition, you need to consider how hard to blow, how fast to blow, and to master the art of pulling away the wand to allow that magic moment when a bubble with a hole in it seals itself to become a perfect sphere. When introducing a dramatic element to your story for the first time, then, consider how much material to work with at a single dramatic unit. Too little material tries to blow a bubble with not enough solution. It may not even make a film across the wand, and if it does, it'll snap at the first breath before a bubble can form. Too much drips off the wand, slobbering all over everything else and snapping apart as well, because the sheer weight of the stuff makes the membrane too thick to flex. So, don't work with dramatic units too large or too small. Don't focus on details too tiny or grand movements too large. Find the range and scope of your dramatic concepts that your readers or audience can hold on to while you pump it full of promise and then let it float into their hearts and minds on its own. How hard you blow is equally important. As you may recall, blowing too hard will simply spit the solution right out of the wand and onto your parents' carpet. Why you chose to blow bubbles in the house even after being told not to is no more fathomable than why you chose to be a writer even though you knew better. Now, blow too soft and your solution will just wiggle and vibrate in the wand, never blowing out to become a bubble at all. Eventually the solution in the wand will simply evaporate and you'll spend a lot of time blowing with no bubble to show for it. Now, a master storyteller can use this effect to his or her advantage. Get the right amount of solution in the wand and then just vibrate the blazes out of it with a gentle blow, tantalizing your audience, who's going to wonder if anything will ever come of it. And just when it looks like the solution has almost evaporated, too much to work, you pick up the airflow and form the bubbles right before their eyes. Or you might just keep it vibrating, a red herring, and simply let it dissolve out of the wand. But better be sure of your skills, though, because you want your audience to know you blew it, not to think you blew it. And do you recall how if you blow at one intensity you get a single bubble, and if you blow with a different push you get a string of small bubbles? In fact, you can even get a series of medium bubbles if you find that narrow mid-range bandwidth. Dramatically, then, you can just drop a lot of little bits of information, a few mid-sized bits of information, or one big bit all in one single blow. Killed 7 with one blow. These are the multi-appreciation moments, MAM, M-A-M, in which a single dramatic movement, passage, or discourse propels more than one dramatic element into a story. In other words, it has multiple meanings, multi-appreciation moment. Now, bubbles have size. The size of a bubble in writing, as in soap, or in writing soaps, depends primarily on the size of your wand and the huff in your blow. Short stories are one-sized wand. Mini-series are another. Haiku, still another. Each one has a maximum size of bubble it can blow, no matter how hard you blow. But size isn't everything. There's such a thing as beauty of perfection. Your idea is your solution. Your format is your wand. Try to make sure not to blow too hard for the wand-solution ratio you're using. And the surface tension. Wonderful phrase that. Somebody should use it for a title of a horror movie. Surface tension. Bum, bum, bum. More wonderful still is the way it works. Stories are about structure and passion. Your solution is about water and soap. Too much water and nothing happens. Too much soap and it all glops up. When you get the right mix of structure and passion, you've got the right raw material for a great bubble. What holds that surface of the bubble together is the attraction among the soap and water molecules, the structure and the passion. What keeps it from collapsing is the slightly higher pressure on the inside than on the outside. A larger bubble has more tension because there's more surface, and yet the total surface area of a collection of smaller bubbles far exceeds that of a single bubble occupying the same space. In addition, smaller bubbles are more stable, lasting for longer, so creating a series of small bubbles dramatically is going to have an awful lot more tension created than one big tension-producing moment. Use big bubbles for big events of singular identity with a limited lifespan, and use smaller bubbles collectively as a consistent foundation of longer duration. Now, put your ear to the soap foam on dishwater or a hot bath, and though the mass remains largely constant, you can hear the satisfying snap, crackle, and pop. Crapple? Did I say crapple? Snap, crackle, and pop of individual bubbles as they burst, although the other may be true in some writers' work. Such formations can add stability to your story, even while providing an underlying level of surface tension, punctuated by hundreds of tiny eruptions. In addition, you can even shape foam into all kinds of complex forms, while the shape of the individual bubbles is far more limited, so it gives you another level of adjustment you can make to your story. While bubbles on their own are usually round, if you dip a bent piece of wire, such as a clothes hanger, into a solution, you can create triangles, squares, and even approximations of hypercubes. Although one might argue that the film from one wire side to the next does not comprise a bubble, then the closed area of such a shape does not either. Guided by these outside influences, a shaped bubble may indeed occur within the space bounded by the wires that doesn't directly touch the wires. One shape, for example, may create a square bubble within another bubble, so that although the larger bubble is directly connected to the wires, the inner bubble is only connected to the planar surfaces of the outer bubble. But I wax scientific. Fact is, the set pieces of your story are the wires dipped in your dramatic solution. And an obvious heavy-handed control technique, you can control very specific shapes by building these second-generation bubbles within bubbles, which are not formed by direct influence of your set pieces, but rather by indirect influence from being attached to those dramatics that are connected to the set pieces. If you can figure that out, you're a far better theorist than I. That's a great point, but not for the faint of heart. Well, another point. Bubbles combine. When two bubbles encounter each other, they might just bounce off like billiard balls. But if conditions are right, they join, creating a common interface between them. They are spherical except for where they're joined, which becomes a flat side, and more than two bubbles can combine, and when they do, all sorts of additional symmetrical interfaces are connected. Your entire story should be like a collection of bubbles, interfaced together. Each single bubble is another dramatic element or point, and over the course of your story, you have blown them one by one until your story has totally, fully taken shape. Then, one by one, they begin to pop. Some of the solution is splattered away, some is absorbed by the remaining bubbles, and due to the extra solution, the remaining bubbles pop faster and faster until all the original bubbles have burst. Alright, and so that's how you create a great big story out of a lot of little pieces, and the tension will increase in a rising tension line to the end. As different things begin to become manifest and be resolved, they just add extra fuel, extra solution to cause the rest of your bubbles to burst. Paraphrasing helps. Well, let's choose. Oh my God. Let's close by seeing how bubble science can help us describe what your characters do in your story. Suppose that Sally calls on the phone complaining to Jane about a personal issue she's facing. Sally calls Jane, complains about a personal issue. Jane knows just what to say, but simply saying it will be rejected and not have the comforting effect she wants. In fact, Jane is smart enough to realize that she has to start out slow and easy. Over the course of the conversation, blow a bubble of comfort big enough to eventually enclose the problem. So with patience, Jane continues to talk to Sally, starting by enclosing a small part of the issue. then slowly expanding her support until it holds the whole thing inside. Now, if Jane is too full of herself and has the habit of beating a dead horse, is emotionally needy and has to have confirmation that from Sally that her problem is completely solved, or is just inexperienced, then she won't know when to stop blowing and will continue pumping support into the conversation. If the bubble gets so large it bursts, and then there's no comfort that has actually been obtained from the entire effort. It's all for naught. But if Jane knows what she's doing, she'll recognize when the bubble is big enough and then pull away the wand and stop blowing so that the sphere can form. She can do this by changing the subject, not off topic, but to something tangential, something touched upon in the conversation, but instead of talking about the part of that new topic that was connected to the personal problem, she now talks about other aspects of the topic that don't improve or involve Sally's original issue. Moving sideways in a topic at the right time is like pulling the wand sideways from the bubble so that it can close. It's a way to seal things off without doing it so abruptly that you rupture the entire thing. Of course, Sally might be mired in her problem and stuck in the wand, but Anne may be in the room with Jane, hear that Sally is trying to come back to the original issue, and being a good friend and student of psychology, realizes another lateral move is needed. So Anne would then raise her hand to get Jane's attention, who would then ask Sally to hold for a moment, and Anne would offer another off-topic comment based on what she's heard of the conversation. And Jane passes the comment on to Sally on Anne's behalf, and now Sally's been doubly distracted, first by Jane's tangential concept and then by Sally's. And at this point, either the bubble is free of the wand or Sally simply won't let go. Well, if the bubble is free, then its effect will remain within Sally long after the conversation, and it will work to resolve her angst. But if it's not free, the air will just whoosh right back out of the wand and the bubble will deflate as if it never was, putting the solution back in the wand, and Sally can go on moping about her problem. Now, you might think this is all very complex, but it's this kind of bubble interaction that makes characters seem fluid rather than built of bricks. But do real people act like that? Sure they do. In fact, the very dramatic scenario I just described happened to me 2 days ago, and that's how I got the idea for writing this tip. I was Jane, and with Anne's perspective interjection, I was able to assuage Sally's angst, free the bubble, and Sally has been quite happy and relieved of her problem for the last 48 hours. Real-life psychology? Character psychology? Story psychology? The answer is blowing in the wind.